The first colony to fall was called New Haven. It was a small world at the edge of the outer reach, home to 12,000 farmers and their families. They had built their town in a green valley beside a river that reminded the founders of places they had left behind on Earth. Children played in the streets. Old people sat on porches and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The Vascari came at dawn. Their ships dropped from the clouds like black rain. There was no warning, no demand for surrender, no chance to flee. The Vascari did not want slaves or resources. They wanted only destruction. They burned New Haven to the ground in 6 hours. When their ships lifted off, nothing remained but ash and silence. Word reached Earth 3 days later. Karen Webb read the casualty report in her office with hands that shook. 12,000 dead. Men, women, children. Gone. Daniel, I need you to invoke Article 7. Full military support from the Council. This is exactly what the compact was designed for. Daniel's voice was tired. I'll try, Karen, but you know how these things go. This is different. This is an attack on a civilian population. Even they can't ignore this. But even as she spoke, Karen knew the truth. She had seen how the Council worked. She had read Daniel's reports for years. She knew that hoping for help was like hoping for rain in a desert. Over the next 2 months, 16 more colonies fell. The Vascari moved through the outer reach like fire through dry grass. 400,000 human beings died. Some were killed in the attacks. Others died in the chaos that followed, fleeing through space in ships that were never meant for war. Admiral Lisa Morgan fought back with everything she had. Her fleet was small, designed for patrol and rescue, not for war against an empire. She won some battles and lost others. Her crews fought with courage that would have inspired songs if anyone had been paying attention. But no one was. She sent daily reports to the Council, begging for reinforcement. She detailed enemy movements, identified weaknesses, proposed joint operations that could turn the tide. Her messages disappeared into the bureaucracy, like stones dropped into a deep well. On the day Daniel Carter stood before the Council to invoke Article 7, the chamber was barely half full. Many delegates had not bothered to attend. They had heard about the human troubles, of course. News traveled fast among the stars. But the outer reach was far away, and humans were, after all, so very new to space. Daniel spoke clearly and carefully, his voice carrying across the ancient chamber. He described the attacks in detail. He showed images of burning cities and fleeing refugees. He named the dead, or at least as many as he could name before his time ran out. Then he made his request. Under Article 7 of the Mutual Defense Compact, which humanity has honored 14 times for other species, I formally request military support to defend our colonies against Vascari aggression. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then High Chancellor Travonis rose from his seat, his 4 arms folded across his chest. The Council sympathizes with humanity's difficulties, he said, his voice smooth and cold. However, we must consider whether Article 7 applies in this case. The outer reach was never formally recognized as protected territory. Human expansion into that region was, some might say, ambitious, perhaps even reckless. Daniel felt his heart freeze in his chest. Chancellor, we charted that region. We settled it. We've defended it for 80 years. Without Council approval, Travonis replied. Your people moved into unclaimed space and called it home. The Council cannot be held responsible for every adventurous species that overextends itself. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Daniel looked around at the faces watching him. Some showed pity. Others showed nothing at all. None showed any intention of helping. 400,000 people are dead, Daniel said, his voice cracking for the first time in 30 years. Children, families. They died, calling for help that never came. Councillor Yevith of the Meraki raised her hand. Perhaps the human delegation could submit a formal petition for future consideration. The review committee could examine the matter and— No. The word came out harder than Daniel intended. The chamber fell silent. He stood straight, looking at the beings who had ignored his people for 80 years. I did not come here to file paperwork. I came here because we believed you were our allies. We believed that the council stood for something more than its own comfort. I see now that we were wrong. He walked to the center platform one last time. Humanity has served this council faithfully since the day we arrived. We have run your supply lines. We have staffed your medical outposts. We have protected your borders while our own people died undefended. And in our hour of need, you offer us paperwork. Trevonis's silver face showed no emotion. The council's decision is final. The matter is closed. Daniel nodded slowly. He looked around the chamber one last time, memorizing every face, every expression, every turned head. Then he walked out without another word. That evening, he sat in the embassy and composed a single message. It contained only 8 words. They have made their choice. Execute homecoming. The message traveled across the stars to Earth, where Karen Webb received it at 3:47 in the morning. She had been dreading it, but she knew what had to be done. By dawn, she had assembled the cabinet. The president sat at the head of the table, his face drawn and pale. Around him sat the leaders of humanity's government, each one carrying the weight of what was about to happen. We've been preparing for this possibility for 20 years, Karen said. The plans are ready. The orders are written. All we need is your authorization, sir. The president looked at the faces around him. Are we certain? Once we do this, there's no going back. Karen nodded. They had 80 years to treat us as equals. They chose not to. Now we choose our own path. The president signed the order at 11:23 a.m. By sunset, every human vessel in council space had received the directive. Every human citizen, every human installation, every human outpost got the same message. Withdraw. All of it. Everyone. Quietly. No speeches. No angry demands. No ultimatums or declarations of grievance. Just silence. Admiral Lisa Morgan received her orders on the bridge of the Endurance. She read them twice to make sure she understood. Then she turned to her crew. Set a course for home, she said. All ships, we're leaving. Kevin Brooks looked up from his station. Admiral, what about the Valori convoy we were supposed to escort tomorrow? Lisa thought about all the convoys she had saved, all the stations she had repaired, all the missions she had run for species that never bothered to learn her name. They'll have to find someone else, she said. We're done. The Endurance turned toward Earth, and the stars that had watched humanity serve in silence now watched humanity leave the same way. The Galactic Council did not notice humanity's absence for 6 days. This was not because the Council was careless or foolish. It was simply that humans had always worked in the background, invisible and unappreciated, like the air that fills a room. No one thinks about air until it's gone. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning, when a communication relay above Cathari Prime went dark. The relay had been installed by human engineers 40 years ago. It had worked perfectly every day since then, carrying messages between 12 star systems. When it stopped, the Cathari communications minister assumed it was a minor malfunction. He filed a request for maintenance and forgot about it. The second sign came from Valoris 4, where the medical outpost that served 6 mining colonies stopped transmitting. The outpost was run by human doctors who treated diseases that Valori physicians considered beneath their attention. Without warning, the outpost went silent. The miners began to die. The third sign came from the frontier, where supply convoys failed to arrive at 12 different colonies. The convoys were human, of course. They had been running those routes for generations, bringing food and medicine to remote settlements that depended on them. Now the routes were empty. The settlements began to starve. On the seventh day, Counselor Yeveth of the Meraki finally asked the question that would change everything. "Where are the humans?" The council chamber fell silent. Delegates looked at each other with confusion and growing concern. Someone sent an aide to check on the human embassy. The aide returned 20 minutes later, pale and shaking. "The embassy is empty," she reported. "Completely empty. They've taken everything, even the furniture." Chancellor Travonis refused to believe it. He dispatched investigators to human installations across council space. The reports that came back were all the same. Research stations abandoned, trading posts closed, mining operations shut down, fleet positions showing only empty void where human ships had once patrolled. The humans had erased themselves from council space. They had done it quietly, efficiently, without a single word of explanation. They had simply packed their bags and gone home. Most shocking of all was what they had taken with them. The star maps humans had shared with the council, containing navigation data for hundreds of unexplored regions, had been deleted from every database. The communication codes that allowed council ships to pass safely through human-charted space had been changed. The early warning satellites that humans had positioned along the Vascari border, protecting 7 species for decades, had been disabled. Commander Nathan Price led the last human convoy out of council space. His ship, the Resolute, carried 200 civilian workers who had spent their lives serving species that barely knew they existed. As they crossed the border into human territory, Nathan looked back at the stars he was leaving behind. His communications officer, a woman named Sarah Cole, approached him on the bridge. "Commander, we're receiving transmissions from council space. They're asking us to respond." Nathan read the messages. Some were confused, some were angry, some were almost pleading. He deleted them all. "We're not stopping," he said. "We're not explaining. They had 80 years to talk to us. Now it's our turn to be silent." Back in council space, the consequences were mounting by the hour. A Valori passenger liner became lost in the Kessler Nebula, a region that only human explorers had ever successfully charted. The ship wandered for 9 days before running out of fuel. 3,000 passengers died of dehydration before rescue could arrive. A plague broke out on a Meraki agricultural world. Human medical ships had always responded to such emergencies. Now there were no human medical ships. The plague spread to 4 more planets before local doctors could develop a cure. The death toll reached 2 million. The Kethari power grid, designed by human engineers and maintained by human technicians, began to fail. Rolling blackouts swept across their homeworld. Factories shut down. Hospitals ran on emergency generators. The economy collapsed within weeks. Chancellor Travonis called an emergency session of the council. For the first time in centuries, every delegate was present. The chamber hummed with fear and anger. "This is an act of war," declared Councillor Vren of the Sindari. "The humans have sabotaged our infrastructure and abandoned their duties. We must send a fleet to bring them back by force." Councillor Yevitz shook her head. "What fleet? Human patrol routes kept our borders secure. Without their maps and sensor data, we can't even find our own frontier." "Then we demand they return," Vren insisted. "We invoke our treaties." "What treaties?" asked Councillor Merith, a young Sindari diplomat who had always been sympathetic to humans. "The Mutual Defense Compact? The one we refused to honor when they asked for help? They've broken no laws. They've simply stopped volunteering." The chamber erupted in shouting. 17 species blamed each other for the crisis. The Valori accused the Kethari of mistreating human workers. The Kethari accused the Meraki of blocking human trade proposals. The Meraki accused everyone of ignoring the problem until it was too late. Through it all, the empty human seat watched in silence. On Earth, the reunification was complete. Human ships had returned from every corner of council space. bringing home people who had spent their lives serving others. They were welcomed with celebrations that lasted for days. For the first time in generations, humanity was whole again. Karen Webb addressed the planet from the steps of the United Nations building. She spoke simply, without anger or bitterness. For 80 years we gave everything we had to the Council. We asked only to be treated as equals. That request was denied again and again. So we have chosen a new path. From this day forward, humanity will depend only on itself. We will trade with those who treat us fairly. We will defend our own borders. We will build our own future. The door is not closed forever, but it will remain closed until we are given a reason to open it. The speech was broadcast across the galaxy. In Council space, beings who had never paid attention to humans suddenly found themselves reading every word. Admiral Lisa Morgan stood on a balcony overlooking San Francisco Bay and watched the sunset paint the water gold. Her wars were over, at least for now. The Vascari had stopped their attacks when humanity retreated to defensible borders. The colonies that survived were being rebuilt. The dead were being mourned. She thought about all the years she had spent protecting species that never thanked her. She thought about the crews she had lost in battles no one remembered. She thought about the grateful messages she had never received. The silence that had followed humanity's departure was deafening, and somehow it said more than any speech ever could. In the council chamber, a maintenance worker noticed a thin layer of dust forming on the human seat. No one had told him to clean it. No one had told him to remove it. So he left it there, gathering dust in the corner, a reminder of something the council was only beginning to understand. They had pushed humanity aside for 80 years, treating them as servants and afterthoughts. They had assumed humans would always be there, patient and willing, waiting for scraps of recognition that never came. The Vascari Dominion attacked 3 months after humanity's withdrawal. They came with a fleet larger than anything the Council had ever faced, 1,000 warships darkening the stars like a swarm of locusts. Their target was the Valori border, the same border that human ships had patrolled for 60 years. Without human early warning satellites, there was no advance notice. Without human intelligence networks, there was no information about enemy movements. Without human patrol routes, there was no first line of defense. The Vascari simply appeared, as if from nowhere, and began their assault. The first world to fall was a Valori mining colony called Praxis Station. 20,000 workers lived there, extracting rare metals from asteroids in the surrounding belt. The Vascari did not bother with negotiations or demands. They simply opened fire. Chancellor Travonis received the news in his private chambers. His silver face, usually so calm and controlled, showed something it had never shown before: fear. How did they get so close without detection? He demanded. His military advisor, a young officer named Sarath, looked at the floor. The human satellites, Chancellor. They were our primary warning system along that border. When the humans left— I know what happened when the humans left, Travonis shouted. It was the first time anyone had heard him raise his voice in 50 years. The Valori fleet scrambled to respond, but they were hopelessly out of position. Human ships had always filled the gaps, always covered the weak points, always arrived first when trouble started. Now those gaps stood wide open, and the Vascari poured through like water through broken fingers. In the first week, 4 more colonies fell. In the second week, the Vascari reached the edges of Moraki space. In the third week, they attacked a Cathari agricultural world and burned its crops to ash. The council was bleeding from 100 wounds, and no one knew how to stop it. The Great Chamber became a war room. Delegates who had spent centuries debating trade agreements and cultural exchanges now argued over fleet deployments and defensive positions. Accusations flew in every direction. The Sindari blamed the Valori for antagonizing the Vascari. The Valori blamed the Moraki for weakening the Council's military. Everyone blamed everyone else for driving the humans away. Through it all, the empty human seat watched in silence. The most devastating discovery came 6 weeks into the war. The Valori flagship, the Pride of Trevin, engaged a Vascari battle group near a strategically important star system. The Valori ship was the finest vessel in the Council fleet, armed with weapons that could crack moons and shielded by technology that had been considered invincible for 3 centuries. But when the Pride of Trevin opened fire, its targeting systems failed. Beams that should have struck enemy ships with perfect accuracy went wide, missing their targets by thousands of kilometers. The Vascari returned fire with brutal efficiency. The Pride of Trevin was destroyed in 11 minutes. 40,000 Valori died, including some of the finest officers in their navy. The investigation revealed a terrible truth. The Valori targeting systems had been calibrated using human mathematics for generations. Human engineers had refined the equations, optimized the algorithms, made tiny improvements year after year. When the humans left, they took their knowledge with them. The old equations, the ones the Valori had used before human contact, no one remembered how to restore them. The same pattern repeated across Council space. Meraki communication networks crashed because human programmers had maintained the underlying software. Cathari transportation systems ground to a halt because human logistics experts had managed the schedules. Sindari power plants overloaded because human safety protocols had been removed from the systems. Humanity had not sabotaged anything. They had simply stopped fixing things that were never meant to be their responsibility in the first place. The Council had built a civilization on human labor without ever acknowledging it. Now that labor was gone, and the civilization was crumbling. Councillor Merath of the Sindari finally asked the question that everyone was thinking. Can we ask them to return? The chamber fell silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Chancellor Travonis nodded slowly. Send a delegation to Earth. Offer whatever they want. Treaties. Territory. Full recognition. Anything. The delegation departed the next day on the fastest ship the Council could provide. It carried representatives from all 17 species, bearing gifts and promises and apologies that were 80 years too late. They traveled for 3 weeks through space that felt emptier than ever before. Without human navigation charts, they had to plot their course using ancient star maps that showed a universe far different from the one they knew. They got lost twice and had to be rescued by neutral trading vessels who charged them enormous fees for the service. When they finally reached Earth's last known coordinates, they found only a marker buoy floating in the darkness. The delegation's leader, a Meraki diplomat named Yevith, approached the buoy with something close to reverence. When she activated it, a recorded message began to play. The face on the screen was Karen Webb. She looked older than her official portraits, with gray in her hair and lines around her eyes. But her voice was strong and clear. If you are receiving this message, you have come looking for humanity. We appreciate the gesture, but we are not interested in negotiation at this time. For 80 years, we served the Council faithfully. We ran your supply lines. We staffed your hospitals. We protected your borders. We asked only to be treated as equals. That request was denied. You taught us what our friendship was worth to you. We listened. We learned. We wish you well. The message ended. The buoy went dark. Yevith stood before the screen for a long time. Behind her, the other delegates argued about what to do next. Some wanted to push forward, to find Earth and make their case in person. Others wanted to return home and report their failure. A few simply wept. Finally, Yevith turned away from the screen. We're going home, she said. There's nothing more we can do here. The Cathari representative protested. We can't just give up. The Council is dying. The Vascari are our problem now, Yevith said quietly. That's what we told the humans when they asked for help. We told them their troubles were their own fault. We told them to handle their problems themselves. Now we get to follow our own advice. The delegation returned to council space with empty hands and heavy hearts. Their report was delivered to the full council in a session that lasted 3 hours. When it was finished, no one spoke. There was nothing left to say. The war continued for another year. The Vascari were eventually pushed back, but the cost was staggering. 3 species lost their homeworlds entirely. 5 more were reduced to a handful of refugee colonies. The council that had stood for 12,000 years was broken, perhaps beyond repair. And somewhere beyond the borders they had once shared, humanity watched and waited, neither celebrating their former master's suffering, nor rushing to ease it. They had simply stopped caring. And that, in the end, was the cruelest wound of all. 5 years passed in silence. The Galactic Council survived, but only barely. The Grand Chamber that had once held 17 proud species now echoed with the voices of 12. 5 races had been scattered by the war, their homeworlds lost, their survivors wandering the stars as refugees. The walls still bore the stones of all 17 founding members, but some of those stones had begun to crack. Chancellor Travanis was gone, removed from office by a vote of no confidence 3 years into the reconstruction. He spent his final days in a small apartment on the Valori homeworld, writing memoirs that no one would ever read. The new chancellor, a younger Valori named Kareth, had campaigned on a platform of reform and reconciliation. His first act in office was to formally acknowledge the council's debt to humanity. His second act was to send yet another delegation to Earth's borders. That delegation returned empty-handed, just like all the others. On Earth, life had changed in ways both large and small. The Outer Reach colonies had been rebuilt, their populations swelled by refugees from the first Vascari attacks. New cities rose from the ashes of the old ones. Children who had lost parents in the war grew up and had children of their own. The memories of burning homes and fleeing ships faded into history, taught in schools, but no longer felt in hearts. Admiral Lisa Morgan retired to a small house by the ocean, not far from the Fleet Academy where she had trained so many years ago. She spent her days gardening and reading, finding peace in the quiet routines of civilian life. Sometimes, old friends would visit, and they would sit on her porch and watch the waves roll in, talking about everything except the past. She kept one artifact from her service days, a Council Commendation Medal, awarded to her for saving a Valori colony from a reactor meltdown. The colony had been evacuated safely. 2 million lives had been saved. The Valori had sent her a form letter, thanking her for her service to the Council. They had spelled her name wrong. The medal sat on her desk now, gathering dust. She never looked at it, but she never threw it away either. Some things were worth remembering, even when they hurt. Ambassador Daniel Carter had returned to Earth with the rest of the diplomatic corps. He was too old to start over, too tired to pretend that the past had not happened. He accepted a teaching position at the university, lecturing young students about interstellar relations and the importance of standing up for oneself. His students hung on every word. He received messages sometimes from beings he had known during his years on the council. Old colleagues who wanted to apologize, former adversaries who wanted to explain. He read every message carefully, thought about each one for days, and then filed them away without responding. He had said everything he needed to say on the day he walked out of the council chamber. There was nothing more to add. Karen Webb served 2 more terms as Secretary of State before retiring to spend time with her grandchildren. Her daughter Emma had survived the Vascari attacks, along with her husband and 2 children. They lived on a colony world in the protected inner systems now, far from any border, far from any danger. Sometimes Karen would visit them and watch the grandchildren play in the garden, marveling at how quickly they were growing. She never spoke about the withdrawal decision. It was history now, studied by scholars and debated by politicians. Some called her a hero for standing up to the council. Others called her reckless for abandoning humanity's place in galactic society. She had stopped caring about either opinion long ago. She had done what she believed was right. The rest was just noise. In council space, the effects of humanity's absence had become permanent. Trade routes that humans had managed fell into disrepair. Scientific research that humans had pioneered stalled without their contributions. The great database of knowledge that the Council had built over 12,000 years grew slower, its gaps becoming more obvious with each passing year. Councillor Merath, now one of the most senior members of the Assembly, had dedicated his career to understanding what had gone wrong. He traveled to human space 3 times, each time hoping to establish some kind of dialogue. Each time, he was turned away politely but firmly. Humanity was not ready to talk. Perhaps humanity would never be ready to talk. They haven't forgotten, Merath reported to the council after his 3rd attempt. They simply don't need us anymore. They've built their own trade networks, their own research institutions, their own alliances. We used to believe they needed us more than we needed them. We were wrong about that too. The council debated what to do. Some argued for patience, suggesting that humanity would eventually forgive and forget. Others argued for pressure, suggesting that economic sanctions or military threats might force humans back to the table. A few, including Merath, argued for genuine reform, for changing the council into something that humans might actually want to join. Nothing was decided. Nothing was ever decided anymore. The council had lost its ability to act, paralyzed by centuries of habit and pride. In the great chamber, the human seat remained. No one had removed it. No one had replaced it. It sat there in the corner, still pushed against the wall, still covered with dust, still waiting for someone to sit in it again. A young Meraki delegate once asked why the seat was still there. An older colleague explained that it served as a reminder. We thought we were the important ones, the elder said. We thought our history and our achievements made us better than everyone else. We thought species came and went, but the council would last forever. The humans taught us otherwise. Do you think they'll ever come back? The young delegate asked. The elder looked at the empty seat for a long moment. I used to think so. I used to believe that time heals all wounds, that eventually everyone forgives. But I don't believe that anymore. Why not? Because they didn't leave in anger. Anger fades, hatred burns out. But the humans didn't hate us. They just stopped hoping. They looked at us and saw nothing worth fighting for. Nothing worth waiting for. Nothing worth caring about. The elder shook his head slowly. You can recover from hatred. I don't think you ever recover from that. Years later, historians would write about the silence that followed humanity's withdrawal. They would analyze the causes and consequences, debate the rights and wrongs, argue about what could have been done differently. They would fill libraries with their theories and dissertations. But in the end, the truth was simpler than any academic paper could capture. Humanity had served faithfully and been ignored. Humanity had asked for help and been refused. Humanity had given everything and received nothing. And when they finally stopped giving, when they finally walked away, the galaxy discovered that silence could be louder than any war. The council chamber stood empty most days now, its ancient stones collecting dust, its crystal windows darkening with age. The seat at the far end of the room remained, untouched and unoccupied, a monument to a lesson learned too late. Someday, perhaps, humanity would return. Someday, perhaps, the wounds would heal and the doors would open again. But until that day came, if it ever came, there was only the silence. And in that silence, humanity had said everything it needed to say. The great chamber of the Galactic Council was older than human civilization itself. Its walls were carved from stone taken from 17 different homeworlds, each piece representing a species that had earned its place among the stars. Light fell from crystal windows set high above, casting rainbow patterns across the circular floor, where delegates had debated the fate of galaxies for 12,000 years. At the far end of this magnificent room, pushed against the wall like an afterthought, sat the human delegation. Daniel Carter had served as Earth's ambassador for 31 years. His hair had turned gray in this chamber. His eyes had grown tired, watching the same scenes play out again and again. He sat straight in his chair, wearing his simple dark suit, and waited for his turn to speak. He had been waiting for 3 hours now. The Valori High Chancellor, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms, was discussing trade routes with the Kethari representative. Their conversation had nothing to do with the agenda. No one seemed to care. The other species chatted among themselves, their translators creating a soft hum of overlapping languages. Daniel checked his notes. He had prepared a proposal for joint research into clean energy technology. Human scientists had made a breakthrough that could benefit every species in the Council. He believed, perhaps foolishly, that this time they might listen. His assistant, a young woman named Grace Sullivan, leaned close to him. "Ambassador, we've been here since morning. Maybe we should request a recess." Daniel shook his head slowly. "If we leave, we lose our place on the speaker list. We've waited 2 months for this slot." Grace said nothing more. She had only been on the job for 6 months, but she was learning quickly how things worked here. Humans waited. Humans were patient. Humans understood their place. Across the galaxy, Admiral Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the Starship Endurance and watched her crew work. They were good people, dedicated and skilled, running patrols along borders that protected species who barely knew their names. A young officer named Kevin Brooks approached her with a datapad. "Admiral, we've received another distress call from the Meraki freight convoy. Pirates again." Lisa took the pad and studied the coordinates. The attack was happening in Valori-protected space, but she already knew the Valori fleet would not respond in time. They never did. "Set a course," she said. "Best speed." "Ma'am, that's 3 days off our assigned patrol route. Command will understand. Those freighters have 2,000 people on board." Kevin nodded and turned to relay the orders. Lisa watched the stars streak past as the ship jumped to faster-than-light speed. This was the 14th rescue mission she had run this year for non-human vessels. Her reports to the Council documented each one. Her reports were filed and forgotten. She did not do this work for recognition. She did it because it was right. But sometimes, late at night when the ship was quiet, she wondered if anyone out there even knew her name. Back in the Council chamber, Daniel finally got his chance to speak. He walked to the central platform, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. 17 species watched him, with expressions ranging from boredom to mild curiosity. "Honored members of the Council," he began, "humanity comes before you today with a gift. Our scientists have developed a new form of energy generation that produces no waste and requires minimal resources. We offer this technology freely, asking only for partnership in its development and fair access to shared research." He paused, looking around the chamber. A few delegates were whispering to each other. One appeared to be sleeping. High Chancellor Travanis raised one of his 4 hands. "The Council thanks the human delegation for this generous offer. However, we must consider whether human technology meets our safety standards. Perhaps a review committee could examine your proposal and report back in, say, 18 months. 18 months. Another delay. Another filing cabinet where human ideas went to die. With respect, Chancellor, Daniel said, keeping his voice calm, our technology has been peer-reviewed by 3 independents. The matter is tabled, Travanis interrupted. Next item on the agenda. Daniel stood alone on the platform for a moment longer. Then he walked back to his seat at the far end of the room. Grace touched his arm gently, but said nothing. That evening, Daniel sat in the small human embassy and wrote his weekly report to Earth. He described the meeting in neutral terms, noting the delay without complaint. He had written hundreds of such reports over the years. He wondered sometimes if anyone back home still read them. His communicator buzzed. It was Admiral Morgan, calling from the Endurance. "Ambassador, we just saved that Meraki convoy. Took out 4 pirate ships. No casualties on our side." "That's good news, Admiral. I'll make sure it's included in the diplomatic record." There was a pause. "Daniel, I've been doing this for 20 years, running rescue missions, protecting borders, keeping the peace. You've been doing your job even longer. When does it start to matter?" Daniel looked out his window at the alien city beyond. Towers of crystal and light rose toward a purple sky. It was beautiful, but it had never felt like home. "I don't know, Lisa. I ask myself that question every day." After the call ended, Daniel opened a drawer in his desk. Inside was a folder containing every thank you note humanity had ever received from the Council. It was a thin folder, 3 letters in 31 years. He closed the drawer and went back to his report. On Earth, Secretary of State Karen Webb sat in her office and read the latest intelligence briefings. The Outer Reach colonies were reporting increased activity along the border with the Vascari Dominion. The Vascari were not members of the Council. They were predators, raiders, conquerors, and they were getting bolder. Karen had sent 17 requests to the Council for joint military planning. Each request had been declined. The Council did not see the Vascari as a threat. The Council did not see anything that happened to humans as important. She put down the briefing and looked at the photo on her desk. It showed her daughter, Emma, who lived on one of the Outer Reach colonies with her husband and 2 children. If the Vascari attacked, they would be among the first in danger. Karen picked up her phone and called the president. "Sir, we need to talk about contingencies. I think it's time we started planning for a future where we can only count on ourselves." The president listened. He had been listening to such talk for years. But lately, even he had begun to wonder. In the council chamber, the lights dimmed as the session ended. Delegates filed out, chattering about dinner plans and upcoming vacations. No one noticed Daniel Carter still sitting in his chair, staring at the empty platform where his hopes had died once again. The human seat remained at the far end of the room, pushed against the wall like an afterthought. It had been there for 80 years. In all that time, no one had ever thought to move it closer.